So now we come to, for me, the absolute highlight, because any good ceremony involves having your friends be part of it. And we've got 300 students and faculty, many administrators that I get to work with every day, but I'm lucky now to introduce and to award the Dean's Medal to Dr. Ash Carter, who has been my friend and someone I've admired for decades. I want to start by saying something about the Dean's Medal of the Fletcher School. This is a very challenging award to receive. Past recipients include former Senator and Secretary of State John Kerry, former AID Director Rod Shaw, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the founder of Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington, NBC's intrepid journalist, Richard Engel. I could go on and on. This is an award that we seek every year to award someone who has had real, dramatic, and positive impact on the international system. So this year, we had many candidates, and we chose Dr. Ash Carter. And let me tell you a little bit about Ash. You've got a long biography in the program, but I want to take you back to Harvard, where he studied both physics and medieval history. This is like Jethro and the Beverly Hillbillies, who couldn't decide if he wanted to be a fry cook or a brain surgeon. Not many people do physics and medieval history and then graduate summa cum laude and then go to study theoretical physics at Oxford as Rhodes Scholars. He is, without question, the most intellectually accomplished individual with whom I have worked in my entire professional life. He is also famous as an innovator, as someone who thinks around the corner. During his time as Secretary of Defense and in the Department of Defense, he served at effectively every level, including being the #3 official, where he oversaw acquisitions, research, logistics of a $600 billion budget, the #2 level as a Deputy Secretary of Defense, and as the Secretary of Defense in a long period of time in the Obama administration, where I was lucky enough to serve as a 4-star combatant commander. So I worked for Secretary Carter for much of a decade. His innovation touched every corner of the department and helped change the way the department found balance between hard power and soft power. It changed the way we procured defense systems. It connected us to Silicon Valley, to the best of American technology and methodology. He did it all through not only sheer force of intellect, but through his personality, his emotional intelligence, his kindness, his sense of humor. In every dimension, Ash Carter is like the basketball player on the team who makes everyone around him look good. That is a very rare quality. He has also consistently been a champion of women. And I will tell you, when the history of the 21st century is written, it will not be about the rise of China or even the rise of India. It will be about the rise of women. Ash Carter got that not 3 years ago as Me Too was bubbling, and not 10 years ago when we began to really integrate women into the armed forces, and not 30 years ago. Ash Carter got it throughout his entire life. He opened every specialty in the armed forces to women. That is a sea change that will influence the department for a century and more. Lastly, and above all, he is a superb human being. He's here with his lovely wife, Stephanie. It's wonderful to have you here as well, Stephanie. Laura and I were lucky enough to have Secretary Carter and Stephanie come visit us in Europe several times when I was the NATO commander. He was cordial and pleasant, not just to the Admiral. He stopped and spoke with everyone on my team, to the most junior of the men and women on the security detail, the communications, everybody he touched, he spent time with. His kindness, his thoughtfulness, and his intellect are his hallmarks. Join me in welcoming Dr. Ash Carter.
Well, good morning, everyone. And Dean Block, Doctors Tarlow and Gordon, former colleagues, Professors Toft and Gallagher, whom I understand are here, graduates, family, friends, faculty, and of course, my friend, Jim Stavridis. Dean of this great school, it's an honor to be here with you this morning. Now, I presided over Stav's retirement as Supreme Allied Commander Europe a few years ago, before he came to Tufts. Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Supreme. Now, that used to stick in my craw. Because you see, I was secretary. I was a secretary. Secretary of Defense. And he was, as he said, supposed to work for me. And here he is calling himself Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Well, now, Dean Admiral Steph, the Pentagon's longest-serving, by the way, combatant commander, is a heralded and everywhere victorious military commander. Victorious, whether in war, in Libya, and against terrorism, or in peace, like in the Balkans, Afghanistan, Colombia, Haiti, or in leading the greatest military collective in all history, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He's also a deep thinker and generously shares ideas in books and papers and teaching. In fact, his family tells me that little baby Jim Stavridis' first words were, "You can friend me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube." Stephanie and I are proud to be friends of Jim and Laura, and I'm very proud, I want to tell all of you, to be here with you today. I'm proud to be with you, the graduates and faculty of this great institution, and I'm proud to be one of you. The noblest thing you can do with your life is dedicate it to the betterment of others and our world. Your attendance and your successful graduation from this institution means you've made that choice. It's a choice that led me through 35 years of dedication to public good, ending up as Secretary of Defense until 18 months ago. Now you join the roles of public service. You would not have come to this institution if you didn't care about making your life devoted in some way to public good. And there's nothing like going home at night and telling your family you're part of something bigger than yourself. Now, as you graduate with a degree in both law and diplomacy, it's worth reflecting on the path upon which you embark on both. Now, you know all about what I'm going to say. because of your excellent training here at Tufts. So think of this as for your family and your friends, so they can appreciate today the noble journey you're beginning. Now, if law is, among other things, the way we shape change towards overall human good and public purpose, many of the paramount challenges you face as public leaders will arise from technological change, technological revolutions, what goes by the dubious term disruption. Take the Facebook hearings before Congress, for example, featuring CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Now, social media are wonderful changers, enablers of commerce and community, but also of darkness and hatred and lies and isolation, invasion of privacy, and even attack. And hearings are a way of calling the public's attention to public dilemmas and paving the road to a solution. In the case of the Facebook hearings, there was no need to call attention. 91% of Americans, according to a recent Pew survey, feel that they've lost control of how their personal data is collected and used. And 2 in 3 think current privacy laws are not sufficient. But in terms of leading to solutions, the hearings laid an egg. They missed entirely what I think was an historic opportunity to devise what everybody seems to realize is needed, namely, a mix of self-regulation by tech companies and informed lawmaking by government. CEO Zuckerberg, for his part, gave an account of his company's ethical conduct that sufficed for the news cycle, but will not, I fear, suffice at all for the great arc of history. And as for the quality of the questioning, well, all I can say is that I wish they had been as poorly prepared to question me on war and peace in the scores of testimonies I gave as they were asking Facebook about the public duties of tech companies. You can relate to that. Make no mistake, we need to land this plane. Among other things, our national security depends on it. And consider that striking the right balance in digital social media is only one dilemma arising from the inexorable advance of technology. And it is inexorable, and as a physicist and a scientist, I believe in its progress. Now, with respect to the digital revolutions, there's also cybersecurity, data breach, ransomware, encryption, and more. And moreover, the digital revolution is quickly being matched and will eventually be overmatched by the bioscience revolution, posing ethical dilemmas surrounding, for example, germ cell editing. Technology is also changing the character of work. And unless our fellow citizens believe that in all this disruptive change, there's a path for them and their children to the American dream, or its equivalent in other countries, we cannot have a cohesive society. Now, I began my career, as I said, as a physicist, working with a disruptive technology. It was called nuclear weapons. It ended World War II, and it probably kept the Cold War from becoming a hot war. But it also created the possibility of total annihilation. And the generation of technologists who trained me were the Manhattan Project generation. They also taught that with knowledge and the consequent capacity to cause change comes great responsibility. They said we all had a duty to public good, not necessarily in government, and occasionally even in opposition to government. But they would have been appalled at the amorality that became the credo in some of the generations to follow. I tried during my time as secretary, to rebuild the bridges between tech and the Pentagon, and found many there more than willing and fully sharing in the spirit I've conveyed. In your careers, leaving Tufts, you must also build bridges between technology, which constantly causes change, and the law, which embodies enduring concepts of collective good. Change of a different sort is transforming diplomacy, and much that you could have taken for granted in the past under this tent, you can't take for granted in the present. As Secretary of Defense, I always believed that diplomacy came first and that force was the last resort. I argued for a bigger State Department budget, even in zero-sum Washington. And I'm appalled at the conditions that have led to the departure of so many skilled diplomats from the State Department, and I hope some of them will return. Now, it needs to be said that there are some antagonists with whom there can be no diplomacy. ISIS had to be destroyed in Iraq and Syria. It was essential to destroy both the fact and the idea that there can be an Islamic State based upon this hateful ideology. It was necessary to protect our people and civilization itself from barbarity. The plan we put together in 2015 and steadily accelerated with building power and growing help from Iraqi and Syrian local forces, together with, yes, allies from NATO and elsewhere, led to the envelopment and liberation of Mosul and Raqqa in late 2016 and early 2017. A victory, by the way, spanning smoothly a difficult and fractious American change of administrations. This was a great credit to our military and our partners, but also to the great goodness they were fighting for. But elsewhere, diplomacy is necessary, however difficult, and you now have the skills to conduct it. Dealing with Russia is where most of my generation learned both diplomacy and defense. Now, great powers use diplomacy to try to align their interests where possible, or where they do align, perhaps, and then seek alignment where they don't. And with Russia, we have great gulfs having to do with Ukraine, hybrid warfare, Syria, hacking of our elections. And all of these would be the kinds of things that normally in statecraft, despite their difficulty, you'd try to work through. Where it gets very difficult with Russia today under Vladimir Putin is when he conceives Russia's interests, or a Russian interest, as frustrating or thwarting the United States per se. It is very hard to close the gap with that intention. And therefore, I think we need to keep trying there, but also stand strong in Europe and in our own forces and diplomatically. China. We also need to stand strong with respect to China. Perhaps the most important, much I could say about security, but perhaps the most important avenue of diplomacy with China is, in fact, economic. There's no other way to say it. China is a communist dictatorship. And we have never been before in a sustained economic relationship with a communist dictatorship. And what it means is that the Chinese government can marshal economic, political, and military tools in a way and focus them on an American company or another country in a way that our government, the way our system works, cannot do it. That is a disadvantage, and and our economists need to give us, and our diplomats need to give us a playbook. And yet our playbook is largely to treat China as though it were a big France. Next is Iran. The nuclear deal removed yet a lot to do. The nuclear deal, for me as Secretary of Defense, removed a headache for me for a time, but in a visible way. It was not and could never have been a grand bargain with Iran. There remained, even with the deal, too many points of difference and malign activities of Iran, and that's why we changed nothing in defense in what we did as a consequence of the deal. It placed no limits upon us at all, and we accepted no limits. 48,000 troops in the Gulf, protecting freedom of navigation, our friends and allies in the region, including Israel. Now, we need to find a way ahead without that deal, and I hope that that can be done. In the meantime, the reality is, as the horizon draws closer, wherein Iran could build a nuclear weapon, for the Secretary of Defense, that is inevitably going to mean more forces to deter and more defenses to defend. With respect to North Korea, I don't know where the upcoming summit will lead. I'm certainly hoping for the best. And on the basis of my own long experience with North Korea, extending over 25 years now, the history is not encouraging. Some do not realize that North Korea already pledged a non-nuclear peninsula, not to Barack Obama, and not to George Bush II, and not to Bill Clinton, but to George Bush I in 1992. So that pledge would not be anything new. What I hope eventuates is more than a pledge, but a plan to implement that pledge. That would be a major achievement, and I hope our president can secure it. Such large-scale undertakings necessarily proceed step by step, not all at once in one meeting. There's a plutonium program to dismantle, a uranium program to dismantle, bomb-making apparatus to dismantle, a scientific establishment to clean out, and so forth, and the same thing for missiles. In short, the deal we hope for with North Korea will have a lot of the same complexity that made the Iran deal so controversial. It's in the nature of things. And finally, I would be very wary of trading a reduction of U.S. forces or exercises on the Korean Peninsula. These are needed for defense and deterrence, whether North Korea has nuclear weapons or not. And also for the stability of what is, after all, the world's most important region for America's future. Now, getting to this moment of diplomacy is very important, and important work lies ahead. But the rewards of success here would also be very great. Let me close with some reflections on your public duty, which should not need to be said, but that in our time needs to be said. You know, when I traveled around the world as Secretary of Defense talking to troops, whether it was at a fire base in Iraq or Syria, a forward operating base in Afghanistan, a naval base, an Army barracks, a Marine amphibious landing beach, or the tarmac in an Air Force wing, or as they trained with and lived among the militaries of other countries, I'd tell them that the foreign leaders I spoke to unfailingly said to me how much their people enjoyed working with our military. And it wasn't just because they were awesomely capable, the finest fighting force the world has ever known. It was also because, those leaders would tell me, of their conduct, their civility, the way they comported themselves, and the values that they and America stood for. That's why the United States has so many allies and friends, and our opponents have few or none. Think about it. There are people who seem to believe that alliances are a gift we give to foreigners. They're not. They're one of the ways we get what we want. And last, whatever you see around you in public life, reflect those values in your own personal conduct, comportment, civility, and adherence to the truth. I want to tell you a very, very, very small story that illustrates in a tiny little way a very, very important point. When I visited Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria, which I did many, many times over all the years that I was in the department at various levels, in all of which we were continuously at war, I would, everywhere I went, talk to troops, and I would make a habit of shaking each one of them in the hand, looking them in the eye, and telling them how much I appreciated their being there. This after talking to them all about the importance of why they were there and what their mission was and what it meant to the human future. And I'd stand out there in the sun, and you know, sometimes it's more than 120 degrees in Kandahar. And I'd stand out there looking, except for the robe, just like this, in a suit and a tie and a shirt. And I'd shake hands, hundreds of them at a time, there in the sun. And the troops would say, well, Mr. Secretary, come on, you're just here with us, relax. Take your tie off, and my staff would say, you know, sir, you got 3 more capitals to go to after this. You can't wear yourself out. Take off your tie, take off your shirt, just roll up your sleeves and be a little cooler. And I didn't. I stood out there and I shook hands one after another, sweating like a wheel of cheese in my suit and my tie on. And I did it not because the troops needed it, but because every time I shook a hand, a picture was taken. And that picture was then given to that soldier, sailor, airman, and Marines. And I would imagine they're going to send it home to their mother or to their spouse or other loved one. And maybe that picture is going to end up in a frame on the mantle or on the bedside table of their loved one meeting the man who had signed their deployment orders. And something in me told me I needed to look right in that picture. And so whatever was going on in that moment in the desert, I had in mind that mom or that spouse. And the word I want to leave with you is, as you now embark on a career in public service, always behave as though someone's mother is watching. Graduates, all this challenge, all these bright opportunities await you. You're prepared for them now. We're counting on you, and we'll be watching with admiration. I'm proud to be with you today. Congratulations, class of 2018.
Mr. Secretary, my friend Ash, that was perfect. For this audience, for this moment, it could not have been more true. So thank you.